Well, welcome back. This is our fourth lesson for the Foundation Paper Piecing class through AQS. And our pocket's all done. And since I left you last, I tore the paper off of the block that I pieced and turned it inside out. And I was real careful to make sure that I got the back side a good crisp edge right here on the edges. And so this is the top edge, and I went ahead and did a top stitch 1/4 of an inch down because this will be the top edge of your pocket. So every time you put your hands in there, you're going to be hitting that. So I think it just needs that extra security of some stitching right along the edge. And so now we're going to lay this aside because now we're going to assemble the outer bag. And the first thing we're going to do to that is we're going to make the handles, and then they'll be all ready to go when we get ready to put them in the bag. And I see I have okay, so to do that, here's how we make the handles. I've pressed a seam, a crease really is all it is, and now I'm going to open up the handle and I'm going to fold both edges into the middle. Now, if you're really careful, you can press it that way. And so again, see, I can let the iron do its work while I just position that and get it pulled to the center. And so you can see this doesn't take very long. Okay, so now we're going to fold it over one more time and line up your outer folded edges. And again, we're going to press. Okay, now we're going to come over to the sewing machine. And we're going to stitch 1/8 of an inch on both edges. So I'm going to start with the open edge. I'm going to stitch that one closed first. Okay, so now I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to sew down the other side. Okay, so now the length of your handles, I told you to cut these 30 inches. But what I did was I took a bag that was one of my favorite bags, and I like to have it so I can carry it over my shoulder. So I made my straps 28 inches long. And so I'm just going to go ahead and cut those, and then we'll have that all ready to go. All right, so that's going to be 24. Oh, that doesn't sound right. No, actually 30 inches is what I ended up with. So that's what we'll trim it to, is 30 inches. Okay, so this is going to be 24 inches and another 6 inches Yeah, and that's about what I cut off. Okay, so now I already finished the other one before I came to class today. So I'm going to trim the other one so it'll be exactly the same size. It is. I guess I already trimmed that one. Okay, so now we've got that done. We're going to lay that aside. Okay, so our next step now is to take this is our outside bag, and I've folded it in half lengthwise, so I have a fold right here. Okay, so this should be 17 inches long from here to here. And we need to draw a line that will be the line where we position the pocket. So I'm going to just take my ruler and I'm going to measure from that fold up 2 inches and draw a line, and you can see my white line right there. Okay, now I ask you to either provide fusible fleece, Bosal fusible, and I'm actually using Pellon Flex Foam that's fusible on one side. And so I'm going to open up my outer bag, and I'm going to press that crease out of there. I don't need that anymore. It was really just to position that line. All right, now I have pre-cut my foam a little bit bigger than I need. And so now I'm just going to take my outer bag and I'm going to lay it on here, kind of center it on this piece of foam. And of course, you know, this foam wants to stick to everything. So I'll semi-get it positioned before I start doing any pressing to it. Okay, so now I'm going to just press, and I'm just going to run as close to the edges as I can. You don't want to get that fusible on the bottom of your iron. And we'll go over this a couple times. Just got to melt that fusible. Kind of working from one side to the other. See how nice and easy it is to use this iron, because boy, those points on both ends makes it so you have heat on both ends. All right, let's run over the rest of it one more time. Okay, so now we're going to let that cool just a minute. And I'm going to get rid of my ironing pad here for a little bit, because I need my cutting mat. So the next thing I'm going to do is trim this excess off. And you'll hear this sounds funny when you cut it. And it also sticks to your mat. Turn it around and we'll go down the other side. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is put the pocket on our outer bag. We're going to take a short break from our sponsors, and we'll come right back and do that.
Nine Patch Fabrics has a wide variety of fabric, patterns, and notions. We offer quilt store quality fabric from manufacturers such as Moda, Robert Kaufman, Island Batik, and more. Nine Patch Fabrics also features a variety of notions including creative grids rulers, sew line marking tools, and more. Visit Nine Patch Fabrics at ninepatchfabrics.com.
Okay, so we're going to position our pocket right above and make sure that this side's longer than that side, okay? And so we're going to put the bottom of the pocket on our white line, and I see that mine hangs over the edge just a little bit, and that's perfectly okay. We'll come back and just trim that even with the sides of the bag before we sew it together. I'm going to pin this so that I keep the pins out of my way, because this is, it's a little bit cumbersome with this foam on the inside. Let's double check my line here. Okay, so now we're going to take this to the machine and we're going to sew along the bottom edge of our pocket. This will fill the space up in here totally of getting this, and I just took it and kind of bent it over. Oh, here, we need to bring it in here first. And now kind of bend it over so that you can hang on to that as you're sewing. Now as I sew this, I'm using the edge of my foot on the edge of the pocket as the guide. And then once I sew all the way across, I'm going to come back and sew halfway between that space, so we've got double stitching on the bottom. Do a little back stitch. And I'm going to cut my thread. I'm going to do a back stitch just because that'll be a wear point. Again, we're going to back stitch. And cut the thread. Okay, so now the next thing I need to do is I need to sew up the sides. And even though I've pinned those, I'm going to sew from the bottom up. And you want to do this so that you're inside the seam allowance, because we'll catch it again when we sew the side seams. Okay, so now we'll do the other side. Okay, so now we want to get rid of any pins that we have in here. Okay, so I'm gonna make one more seam right here in the joint of the two squares because that'll then give us two nice pockets on our tote bag. So we'll just stitch right there in the ditch. Looks like I might have just a tiny little pleat, but I'll press that out of there. Okay, so now we are ready to sew the side seams. So we're just going to take, and this is a good place for us to use our clips because it certainly will hold it a lot better than we can do it with pins. Oh, do you know what? We have one more thing we need to do first. I told you this pocket was maybe going to be just a little off. I need to trim that before we do our side seams. Okay, now we can do our side seams. Now, I am going to take just a slightly larger than 1/4 of an inch. I actually brought it over here on this machine to where it was at 3/8 of an inch so that you've got just a little bit more to bite into as you're sewing. And if you hang on to it real tight, it squeals at you. You'll hear it when I have my hand pressing down on it here. I don't know if you noticed, but I sewed from the bottom to the top each time. So if we had any trimming we needed to do, we could do that here at the top of the tote bag. Okay, so now we need to form the bottom of the bag. All right, so I've marked my ruler and I want to place the seam line on the 1.5 inch mark. So I marked my ruler because we're going to do this 4 times, so it's easier. I don't have to figure it out each time. And the line will actually be 3 inches wide. So when I lay this on the seam, and I have my 1.5 inch mark right there, and here's the seam. And so now what I'm going to do, and I'm using a pen for this because I found it works better on this foam, but I'm going to mark my line across the corner, and you can see that that's 3 inches from here to here. Okay, all right, so I'm just going to take that right to the sewing machine and sew it, and then I'll put one pin in just to hold it. And we're just going to sew across that line. Okay, that one's all done. Now we need to do the other corner the same way. And what this means, the fact that that line across there is 3 inches, that means that's how wide your bag is on the bottom. You could certainly change that. If you wanted 4 inches, you could actually go up 2 inches and then your line would be at 4 inches. Okay, so now I'm going to do the other corner exactly the same way. And I'm going to lay the 1.5 inch line on my seam line. And then it should be 3 inches across, and that's the line I'm going to draw. And that's where I'm going to stitch. Okay, so the next step in this is that we need to trim that off so that we just leave a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And so this is real easy to cut. Okay, so now I'll show you how this foam makes your bag stand up really well. Maybe better after I get the lining in it. All right, so next we're going to work on the lining, and we're going to let you see some commercials from our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
Tracy's Tables has all of your custom sewing table needs. Visit tracystables.com to see the complete line of unique tables, carts, and shelves. And all of Tracy's tables are made in the USA. The secret to every great project is great lighting. You can have beautiful fabric, the best threads, but if you can't see what you are sewing, we all know what will happen. Vivilux lights and lasers are the only lights made by quilters for quilters. Look for Vivilux lights and lasers at your favorite independent sewing and quilt shop or online.
So the first thing we're going to do on our lining is we're going to prepare the inside pocket. And you should have cut a 20 by 16 inch piece of fabric for the pocket. And I made it black so that it stood out from the fabric that I'm using for the lining. And so we're going to just sew a 1/4 inch seam on this pocket. Okay, now we need to press this. All right, now we're going to turn it inside out. Now, when I pressed this, I pressed it so that the seam was going to fall on the back side a little bit. And so, can you see here how I just pulled it over just a tiny bit? And so that will just make it so that that seam lays against the tote bag and not on the bottom of the pocket. Okay, just like we did on the outside pocket, I'm going to do a row of stitching across the top of the pocket. And again, this is really just because this is the part that's going to get the most wear. And so this will be the front of the pocket. Okay, so now I have already pre-marked the lining with a line that is 3 inches from the top. And so this is the open side. The fold is down here. Okay, so again, this is 17 inches deep, just like for the outer bag. And so this is where I'm going to line up the top of this inside pocket. And we just did that row of stitching on that inside pocket. Oh, well, I don't want you to copy what I just almost did. I almost sewed the pocket to both layers. We only need the pocket on one layer. So now before I sew the pocket to the lining, I want to divide this into 3 pockets. And if you put a pocket that is 5 inches wide in the middle, it'll be just the right size to slide your cell phone into. So the first thing I'm going to do is, this is 20 inches wide, so I'm going to make a mark at 10 inches. That gives me my center. Now I'm going to go 2.5 inches on both sides of that. Will give me my 5 inch pocket. 1, 2.5. All right, so now I'm just going to take my ruler and draw those lines so I have something to stitch on. Okay, we've got those all marked. Now we're going to come over here to the sewing machine again, and we're going to sew the bottom of the pocket first. You notice the machine's making a little bit of noise. It's because I'm sewing through all those seam allowances in there that I put on the back side. Okay, so I'm going to sew in these 2 lines to make the 3 pockets. Now you do want to backstitch here at the top, because that is definitely going to be a wear point where you're putting your hands in and out of those pockets. So I'm just going to backstitch 2 or 3 times right here just to secure that. Now let's go to pocket number 2. Then again, I'm going to backstitch several times here at the top. And now I'm going to stitch in the seam allowance on the edges, just to, there we go, just to secure that, and then we won't have to worry about it when we do our side seams. All right, we're going to get the other side seam. And again, I'm stitching in the seam allowance. Okay, let's give this a quick press. Get all those stitches set in there good for us. Now you noticed I stuck my hand in there because this is the top of the bag. I always wonder, did I put the pocket on correctly? Well, yes, we did. All right, so now we're going to put it right sides together and sew up the side seams. Okay, so now I'm ready to sew the side seams, and I'm going to take just a slightly deeper than 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And so I think I'm going to come right here to the edge of my feed dogs just to give me a slightly bigger seam allowance. Okay, now you remember what we did with the outer bag is how we did the corners. We have to do the corners exactly the same way on the lining. And so again, I'm going to line up the 1.5 inches on my seam line, right there. And then we'll have 1 3 up here. And now we'll do the other corner. All right, so just like we did before, I'm going to just cut this off so we just have 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so now when we did our bag, we left it wrong side out. When we do the lining, we need to turn the lining right side out so that we're putting right sides together inside the bag. Oh, shoot. Well, you know what? I have to get my seam ripper out because I should have left an opening here on the side for us to be able to turn the bag. So I'm going to get my seam ripper out, and while I'm doing that, Here's another word from our sponsors. All right, since I have to rip this out anyway, I've actually just took a few stitches out so I could get into my seam line. And so I'm going to show you how to use the seam ripper because you're going to end up having to rip some seams out too. All right, so I'm going to put my fingers, let my fingers be the guide for the seam here. And I'm going to put the red ball underneath my seam line. And so now when you do that, you can just slide that red ball right along your seam line and take out those stitches. But if you get that positioned just right, maybe I can do it from this angle so that you could see better. If you get that ball underneath your stitches and point the arrow up, do you see how I can just move that ball right along that seam line? Okay, so I have an opening. I think we need a little bit wider opening than that. When I made the sample, I didn't leave the opening quite large enough. And when you try to pull that foam through it, it's a tuggle. So we're just going to make this opening just a little bit bigger. All right, that maybe is good right there. All right, now I can turn it right side out. It's through that hole that we're going to be able to pull the whole thing through. All right, so the first thing we need to do is we need to position our handles. And so the one thing you want to make sure that you do is that you don't twist them. So do you see how I'm just bringing that up? And it's going to lay like that. All right, so now I'm going to put this 4 inches from the edge. And don't let go of that because I'm sure if you do, you'll twist it. So we'll put a clip there and get that one in position. Now I'm just going to move this one over here. And I'm going to get it 4 inches from the edge, right there. Now I'm going to turn it around and I'm going to do the other strap the same way. So again, I'm going to pick it up, and so it should look like that. Let's measure this again just to make sure we got the right, same measurement here. Okay, it's going to be right there. Okay, so now, well, one of those measurements isn't quite right, is it? On one side, I have it here, 4 inches. Oh, I put it on the other side of 4. So whatever you do, you need to make sure your handles should be right across from one another, like that. So depending on what side of the 4 line you put them on. There we go. All right, so now you've got your handles in there. And the pocket on the bag is on this side. So I'm going to put the lining pocket on the other side. And drop it right down inside the bag. Now it's a matter of lining up the side seams, and we'll put some clips in here to hold that. And I'll come over here and I'll do the other one. And it's this kind of a seam that these clips really come in handy. Can you imagine if I had to go in and put straight pins through all of this? By taking just that little bit extra seam allowance in the lining, you can see that it just fits in here perfectly. All right, so now we're ready to sew the lining in the bag with the handles. So when we get this seam done, it'll almost be finished. And this, you just kind of have to work that, that foam right around your machine. Okay, so now the next thing is, you know, the hole I had to go back and make here in the lining is I'm going to bring one corner in, another corner in, and you just kind of keep pulling it through. Where's my hole at here? Here it is. There's the big reveal. Now, the very last thing that we have to do to this bag is I'm going to put some clips on here again because we're going to go around and do one row of stitching to help tame this lining so it stays inside the bag. So I'm just going to use my fingers and pull it in and pin it. And we'll do a row of top stitching right here along the top edge. And really what I'm doing here is I'm kind of compressing that foam right there on the edge so that it'll give us a nice edge at the top of the bag. Okay, one more time around and our bag will be all finished. Going to lengthen my stitch just a little. Maybe make it 2.8. You want to make sure you get your handles out of the way when you're doing this. Now I will tell you, I probably could have and should have taken this machine because it has a free arm on it, that this would have been a lot easier if I used the free arm to be able to do this top stitching. Almost there. So, our bag is all done. I hope you've enjoyed doing this. I have one more thing I want to show you that relates to paper piecing. And that is, sometimes patterns will be split. I gave you patterns where we started in the middle and we went round and round, or we went from one side to the other. So that's probably some of the simpler patterns that you should start with when you're doing foundation paper piecing. So I want you to know that sometimes foundation paper piecing will have multiple sections to it. And this is a quilt that I made a number of years ago, and I called it Paducah Dogwood. And then the Visitors Bureau asked if they could use this to make the sign for the Dogwood Trail. And so they just used one block, and that's on the signage that goes around town to designate the Dogwood Trail. But I want to just show you how that's different from what we did. And here it is. The flower itself, one petal of the flower, just one section, is actually 4 pieces. And so you can start with the big piece and add this one on and this one, and the same thing on this side, and then you put those 2 together, and now you can add these triangles on either end. And even the frame here is foundation pieced. It's done in 2 pieces, a strip, and that makes this section here, and then you just combine it with the squares in the corner. So there's lots of things that you can do with foundation paper piecing. Thank you so much for joining me for the class this time, and I hope that you're enjoying all of the classes that we're providing. We already are in the process of working on the next one, and we've had requests for doing something with applique. So I'm going to be doing applique and ruching. We'll be doing some applique both by hand and machine. And the ruching, of course, is going to be done by hand. But it's a quilt that I call Last Roses of Summer. So you're going to get to learn several ways to do stems, leaves, and the ruched flowers. So now, before you go, I want to make sure you go register for the prizes that our sponsors are providing. That's Tracy's Tables, Wonderfill with our thread, Vivalux with our lighting, 9-patch fabrics with the jelly rolls and the batiks and the 108-inch wide backing, and lots of these, the clips that we've been using, the pencils that we've been using, all came from 9-patch fabrics, and our Panasonic iron. So be sure to register, because you can't win if you don't register. And if you're not yet an AQS member, we hope that you'll join us. We are the largest quilting membership organization in the world, and we'd love to have you join us and take advantage of all the things that AQS has to offer. So until next time, we want to see some pictures of your bags on our Facebook page, so be sure to post them, and we'll see you at the next class.